Welcome to Heart of Science. I really appreciate your time in speaking to me today.
Very good to be on the programme.
I'll start by asking you to briefly describe, if possible, your field of scientific research and tell us what motivated you to pursue this career of science.
Well, I am an astronomer and cosmologist, and the main aim really is to understand the universe, the things in it, and how they've evolved. And I've been lucky, really, because I've been doing this subject throughout my career, and there have been huge developments. We now can observe stars, galaxies, and super galaxies at huge distances. We know that many of the stars in our galaxy are surrounded by planets like the Earth, which makes the night sky far more interesting. And we can trace back cosmic history to a so-called Big Bang about 13.8 billion years ago, when everything started. The very beginning is a mystery, but we can trace things back to the first microsecond and understand how, from that hot, dense beginning, the atoms, stars, planets, and galaxies formed. So it's a wonderful story, and just as Darwin taught us how the biosphere evolved from simple beginnings, so we're now trying to extend what Darwin did to try and understand how the cosmos itself evolved from simple beginnings.
So, as a cosmologist, do you believe that our universe is infinite in size, or that there are an infinite number of universes, or both?
Well, those are fascinating questions, and I'm afraid we can't answer either of them. The part of the universe we can observe with our telescopes is huge. It extends to objects so far away that their light has taken about 12 billion years to reach us, but there's a sort of horizon around us. So the part of the universe we can observe is huge, but finite. But of course, there may be a lot of material beyond the horizon, just as if you're in the middle of the ocean, you have a horizon, but the ocean doesn't stop there. We are almost sure that the universe goes on much further than we can see, but we don't know whether it's infinite or not. And the other question you raised is whether there was another Big Bang, apart from the one that gave rise to ourselves and our galaxies. And there again, we don't know. There's an idea called the multiverse, according to which our Big Bang was one of many, and that's a speculative idea. We don't know if it's true yet.
So, in your opinion, is there another identical version of Earth somewhere else in this universe, or are we the only copy?
Well, if the universe went on forever, then every combinatorial option, as it were, would be repeated, and so there would be an exact replica of us somewhere, but that would be far, far beyond our horizon. But one thing we have learned just in the last 5 years is that if you look up in the sky, you see thousands of stars with the naked eye, and we know that in our Milky Way there are about 100 billion stars, and we know that quite a large fraction of those have planets around them, many rather like the Earth. So there are lots of planets which have about the size and temperature of the Earth orbiting other stars. And a fascinating question, of course, is, did life evolve on those, even intelligent life? That's one of the most exciting questions for 21st century science to answer.
So, is it plausible that humanity will one day colonize the galaxy and visit all these planets? Or is our destiny simply to evolve on Earth and to go extinct on Earth?
Well, I think our descendants will probably explore the rest of the galaxy, but I'm not sure we call them human, because one thing we've got to realize is that we have evolved over about 4 billion years from the very first life, but the Sun and the solar system has more than 5 billion years ahead. So we should not think of ourselves as humans as being the culmination of evolution. And I think there will be a lot of post-human evolution. And I think that interstellar travel is really going to be an enterprise for post-humans, because for humans to do it is problematic, if only because the time it takes to get to these stars is longer than a human lifetime. So I think it'll be a task for post-humans whose lifetime is much longer and for whom a journey lasting thousands of years is less challenging. But I think that may happen one day, but it won't be humans who do it.
Some may argue that there is no point in astronomers wasting time staring into space when there are more pressing issues on Earth such as HIV or climate change. How do you justify public money being spent into cosmological scientific research?
Well, I think two reasons. First, that it's a way to improve our basic knowledge of physics, because if we look in the sky, nature has done experiments under conditions far more extreme than we could achieve here on Earth. On Earth, we squeeze things to high pressures, raise them to high temperatures, and produce particles going very fast in accelerators like the LHC and CERN. But in space, far more extreme conditions prevail in some places, and so we can test the laws of nature to breaking point, as it were, far more cheaply by doing astronomy than by building experiments. So that's one reason. But I think the exploration is worthwhile for its own sake. I think many people are fascinated in astronomy. Humans have always gazed up at the night sky. It's the one feature of our environment that's been shared by all humans all over the world since the dawn of history. Astronomy straddles all boundaries of nation and faith, so it's a universal interest, and I think that's in itself a justification. And to take an example, think of the amount of news coverage devoted to dinosaurs. Nothing could be more irrelevant to dinosaurs, because nothing's more fascinating to young people. Nothing is better than dinosaurs for getting young people to take science seriously. And astronomy has the same role for young people, and it's a fascinating subject which is really an extension of the exploration of our world, which took place in previous centuries.
A prominent example of physical success is the research at CERN, which was paid for by taxpayers and has resulted in the discovery of the Higgs boson. But how will understanding particle physics benefit British taxpayers, or is it purely for the enjoyment of scientists?
Well, I think if you'd been around 100 years ago, you would have made the same complaint about Professor J.J. Thomson when he discovered the electron. And you will agree that that was good value for money. And we don't know what the outcome of CERN will be. I hope it will also benefit us in the long run. And to put it in proportion, the UK government spends about £5 billion a year on scientific research, mainly in universities of all kinds. And of that budget, 2% is going towards CERN. It's a huge amount of money, as you say, but that money is spread over 10 years and spread over about 20 or more countries.
You mentioned the science budget, but do you think that the current science budget is too small or too large in an era of austerity?
Well, I think it's too small because it's a smaller proportion of our GNP that is being spent by most other nations. It's much smaller than South Korea, it's smaller than the US, it's smaller than Germany. And given that we have a strong tradition of science in the UK, I think it's very worrying that we're jeopardizing it by not spending more. And we're jeopardizing the quality of universities like yours and like mine through not being able to compete with other countries in attracting the best scientists and the best academics. I think it's a very short-sighted policy, and I would rather have a rather higher taxation on overpaid wealthy people to cover it.
I'd like to talk a bit about politics. Lord Kelvin was of the first scientists to be granted a life peerage, who also happened to be president of the Royal Society. So what I'd like to ask is, what is the job of scientists in Parliament, and how important is your role as an ambassador of science?
Well, I think the UK has quite a good record of interactions between scientists and parliamentarians, certainly better than in the United States. If we could take two examples, the idea of ethical guidelines on research on embryos or stem cells, for instance, has been agreed fairly uncontroversially in this country, whereas it's been a big hassle in the United States. So I think we have a better liaison between scientists and politicians in this country than in many other countries. And also, scientists are quite well embedded in the civil service in this country. The House of Lords is just part of that, of course, and I wouldn't claim it's a very large part, but I think it is good that there are some academics who are in Parliament. Not very many in the House of Commons, but rather more in the House of Lords. And I think that does help to provide expertise when reports are produced on special issues and when science comes up in a controversial political context. So I think it's a good thing that there are some scientists there, but I don't want to overclaim for what we do.
So, in your opinion, would a possible reform of the House of Lords to include elected senators rather than appointed peers result in a lack of representation of science in politics due to a lack of expertise?
Well, of course, there is a problem in that while there is a strong case, in my view, for reforming the House of Lords, you would lose the expertise in it if the only people who were elected were party politicians. And, of course, what happens now is that most of those appointed to the House of Lords are party appointees. I mean, to give an example, in the last 6 months, Cameron appointed 45 peers in the dissolution honours, and 4 crossbenchers have been appointed who are sort of experts. So most of the appointments in the House of Lords, and the reason that it's overcrowded now, come from political appointments. And my slight worry is that if you had elections to the Lords, then frankly they may not attract huge interest, just as the elections for members of European Parliament don't attract huge interest. And the kind of people who'd be on the party lists would be the same as the people who get nominated by Cameron, etc., at the present time. So it's not obvious to see how we can make the House of Lords higher in quality. I wish we could, but it's not obvious how one can actually reform it in an effective way. The one thing which I would say is it should be smaller. It's grown and it's got about 800 members, of whom about 500 turn up on the typical day, and that's really far too many, of course.
So how do you think we can reduce the numbers without upsetting too many people?
I think we may have to upset a few people, and might be no harm in that. But I think in future people should be elected or appointed for a fixed term. That would help. And I think people can be encouraged to retire. So it's going to be a slow process, but I think there is clearly a need to reform the House of Lords. And I just hope that some steps are made in that direction, which will obviously, as one aim, reduce its size.
The largest problem mankind has arguably ever faced is global warming. Is the solution to be found in the scientific arena or the political arena?
Well, both, of course. I think clearly it's going to require politics and economics. My personal view is that the answer lies in more science and more technology. And one thing I've been involved in is a scheme to try and persuade all prosperous countries to double the amount of research and development they do into clean energy and also into better energy storage, because the sooner we can improve ways of getting clean energy and bring its cost down, the sooner coal and oil-fired power stations will be replaced. I mean, we know in particular that countries in Africa and Asia are going to have to increase their power consumption as they develop and become more advanced. And what we ought to try and ensure is that as they do this, they won't be forced for economic reasons to build more coal-fired power stations. We've got to do all we can to bring down the cost of renewables, solar and all the others, and have better ways of storing energy and better ways of transmitting it via smart grids. So in my view, that's going to be the most effective way in which we can reduce carbon emissions and thereby limit the serious consequences of global warming, which will certainly come about if we go on as we are now. I'm skeptical about any sort of self-denial, bare-bones policies where we tell people not to use so much energy. I think there's got to be a positive incentive, as there would be if clean energy was more attractive. I mean, just as electric cars may become more attractive, so perhaps ways of generating energy without using fossil fuels will become more attractive and eventually cheaper. And that's what we should all hope for, I think.
There are many people who don't clearly understand climate change due to a lack of scientific background. Do you believe class and social background is still a realistic obstacle people in the 21st century face in engaging with science?
I don't think it's class or social background particularly. It's sort of education and interest. I think it is important that everyone should have some feel for science, whether or not they're going to go on to be scientists or technical people in their careers. And that's because climate change is just one of the important political questions which we face, where science is important. Think also of all the issues in health and the ethics of genetics and environmental issues and energy. All these things are areas where governments have to make decisions. And if the public in general, if the voters in general don't have a feel for science and for numbers at all, then of course you can't have a properly informed democratic debate. So that's why I think we do need to have good education in science at the school level, and not just for the fraction who go on to study these subjects at university. And I think it's important also to realize that most of these political questions involve science, but they also involve economics and ethics and politics as well. So the politicians don't have an easy job.
So how do you think we can re-engage disinterested adults who were failed at school in science education and have very little interest in science?
Well, that's going to be difficult, of course, but I think you find most people have interest in some science. They may watch David Attenborough on the television. They're perhaps interested in medical issues and health, which affects them and their family. They're perhaps interested in the weather and things like that. And I think one can try and interest people. And I think many people are interested in some kind of science, but not in all. But science should be part of everyone's education. It's very sad if there are people who don't understand the basis of biology, don't understand what causes diseases and things like that. That should be part of everyone's science. And of course, the other thing about science is that it's a universal culture. It's the most universal culture because protons, proteins, and Pythagoras are the same whatever part of the world you live in. And so they're one of the things that help to straddle all these difficult political boundaries.
Well, finally, I'd like to ask you, as the Astronomer Royal, you are provided with a stipend of £100. I was wondering what your responsibilities are in order to earn this stipend of £100.
Yes. Well, as I say, I don't even get that now. I think that was abolished quite a long time ago because Astronomer Royal now is really just a title. It used to be the person who ran the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, but in the 1950s, the Greenwich Observatory really became a museum. That's because it was thereafter possible to build telescopes under clearer and drier skies in the Canary Islands, in Hawaii, in Chile, and places like that. And so what happened was that the Royal Observatory became a museum and a wonderful place. I recommend people to go and see it. But the title of Astronomer Royal was kept as a sort of honorary title, but given to an academic, a professor like myself, working in the subject. So I don't get paid anything for being Astronomer Royal, but on the other hand, I don't have any real duties, although obviously I feel an obligation to speak and write about astronomy and space and other subjects, which is what I spend quite a bit of time doing.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you join me today.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be on your program, and your program is doing its bit to help to raise interest in science and to fascinate people with all the great discoveries being made. So best of luck with your program.